Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned in to the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much. If you're new around here, please make sure to give a like or subscribe at some point during this video. Whether or not you like the guy that we're going to be reporting on today, Gareth Southgate, as we all know, the genius mastermind that took England to two finals in the Euros and semifinals in the World Cup. He's out of his job. He decided to part on his own ways, on his own term. And now he's been somehow, right here, it's been reported by the Mirror, some other credible sources such as Jason Frey on Twitter, and they are reporting that he could be next up on the worldwide search for the USMNT role. We need a coach. He needs a new job. First of all, straight to the point, Braden, your initial thoughts on this rumor right here. Southgate as the USMNT coach, what do you think about it?
My main initial thought, and it doesn't really have anything to do with him to the USMNT, but it's just props to Gareth Southgate. He knew that his time was up with England, despite, if you look at the results at least, just looking them on paper, he did very well, but he knew his time was up with England, and he resigned. Greg Berhalter probably could have taken some notes from that because he was stubborn and decided to stay in the job for as long as he could for some reason. I don't know why. We know he doesn't take any accountability. So props to Southgate on that. But it's an interesting one. And I think it's funny because I've seen a couple people say this on Twitter, and I completely agree. Southgate ticks all of the boxes on paper of a manager that we would want. He has a lot of experience on the international level. He's been managing England for a while now, and he has a lot of success. Like you said, 2 Euro finals, although they did lose both of them pretty narrowly, made the semifinal of the World Cup, and ultimately made deep runs with an England team that has always been talented. You can argue maybe their current generation now that Southgate was managing is more talented than they had in the past, but they've always had a lot of talent, but haven't really achieved anything. We all know they have never won the Euros, only won the World Cup back in 1966. I don't even think they'd ever made a final previously up to that. So you can look at the style of play all you want, but he did get results on paper. He ticks all the boxes, but it would still somehow be seen as an underwhelming hiring. I think that's just because of his style of play, some of the unconvincingness in some of the results in the past, and we'll get more into that next topic. But I think it's a little weird for me to see a manager with such proven success and experience, but still have my doubts about him.
Yeah, I think that he's a lot of people have alluded to this, that maybe he's an upgraded version on Greg. I will say this, he's a better manager than Greg, I think. And honestly, it's very similar because it seems like talent has carried him throughout this time, and he has really good draws. If he becomes the USMNT coach and we get these types of draws against countries that, let's be honest, you fancy your chances to go through against, maybe he's the right guy. But honestly, my initial thoughts are, please no, because just based on the other guys that are available, not trying to knock down on him, I think he did what he could there, or not, or there was for entertaining purposes for us that don't like England. But talking about talent and how he may have carried him, we're going to focus now, just to give you guys a briefing, we're going to be talking about the recent results, the most recent sample we have, and then the biggest failures and successes he's had. Later on, we'll talk about how he would set us up and why ultimately we think it's a good choice or not for him to be the coach. So stay tuned. Now diving into this tournament where, well, we talked about talent bailing him out. Braden, your insight onto this tournament, what is there to take away if we look at this guy as a possible candidate, looking at his most recent results, getting, again, a silver medal in the Euros?
Well, I'm actually going to take it back initially to his first big tournament with England, the 2018 World Cup, where we all know that they made the semifinals, but it really wasn't convincing. If we remember back in the group stage, they struggled to beat Tunisia. Probably, I think you can argue, shouldn't have beat them. Did lose to Belgium as well in the group stage, kind of got bailed out by, like you said, the easy draw. They had Panama in their group, absolutely smashed them in the other game, so they got out in second, very unconvincingly. Took pens to beat Colombia, who we all know now are a very, very good side, but back in 2018, we're not at the same level. 2022, we know they didn't even qualify for the World Cup, so it's a team, again, that's not close to the level that you'd expect to be beating comfortably, just like Sweden, who they played in the quarterfinals, who were far and away the worst team remaining in the tournament, and I wouldn't even say they beat them convincingly. And then in the semifinals, losing to Croatia, who, yes, they made the World Cup final, but they got comprehensively beat by France. I think we all know it was an underdog run. They didn't necessarily, I won't say they didn't deserve to be there, but it was a shock. They weren't the second best team in that tournament. So I think he got off to a very unconvincing start, but the semifinal run gave some England fans hope. Then you go to Euro 2020, where I think they had a pretty solid tournament, but they struggled to score goals. And that's the key thing that concerns me, because he was strong defensively with very good defenders. If you come to the USMNT, you have very bad defenders and a very bad goalkeeper, at least for now. Hopefully the youth can step up in coming years, but if he takes over initially and probably for 2026, the defense is not going to be good enough to rely on, which is what he did with England for basically the entirety of his tenure. And of course, like you mentioned, some of the attacking talent as well. But I mean, they barely scored any goals, although they did keep a lot of clean sheets. So a bit of a concern there. And then, like you said, in this most recent Euros, it was, again, very, very unconvincing. In the group stage, I think they had one of the most underwhelming performances in a group stage for the favorite ever. I mean, let's not forget, they were the betting favorite to win the entire tournament coming in. And you can look at the results. They lost in the final. Maybe that makes sense. But looking back to the group, they barely beat Serbia. I don't think they should have won that game. They drew Denmark. Again, they really had no business winning that game. I think you can argue Denmark were the better of the two teams. And then they drew Slovenia in the final game, a very, very weak team. Yes, they fought hard against some other nations like Portugal later on in the tournament, but realistically, with a nation with as much firepower as England has, they should be beating all three of these teams comprehensively. And the fact of the matter is they failed to do that. And then they were outplayed by Slovakia in the round of 16. Inexcusable. The only reason they went through is, like you said, individual talent. Jude Bellingham, who had ghosted all game, by the way, one of the best players in the world, they had gotten nothing out of him. He comes up clutch with a bicycle kick, and then Kane scores. Again, one of the best strikers, probably the best striker in the world, comes up clutch. When you have that kind of talent, you can afford to be bad for 90 minutes. When you have the USMNT's level of talent, you cannot afford to be bad for 90 minutes. And it was the same thing against Switzerland. They got bailed out by individual talent at the end of the game. I think Switzerland were the better team. They were solid in the semi. I'll give them that against Netherlands. I think they figured it out a little bit. And then the final, they were played off the pitch. Yes, the final score was 2-1, but let's not kid ourselves here. Spain were in control of the entire game. Wonder strike, once again, individual talent. Cole Palmer, what a goal from him. That's not down to Southgate. That's just down to the individual talent that Cole Palmer has. And maybe if Southgate had made the correct decision to start him earlier in the game or at the tournament at all, maybe they would have performed a little bit better. So a little bit of man management issues as well. Overall, if you just look at his results throughout his entire England tenure, it's one thing remains constant, and it's just a lack of goals and a lack of convincing wins, even against teams that you would assume are worse. I think the perfect example is, we're talking about the USMNT. Southgate's England played the USMNT at the World Cup, and let's not forget, it was a very underwhelming USMNT. We had just drawn with Wales in their first World Cup, I believe, ever. We had just drawn with Wales, a very, very poor team, and Southgate drew with us 0-0, couldn't even score a goal. And arguably, I think if you look back at the game, we were the better side. If anyone was going to win that game, it was going to be the USA. We talk about Southgate being the English Greg or the upgraded Greg. Well, he couldn't beat Greg with a much better team. On paper, they have one of the best teams in the world. We all know the USMNT squad is fine, but nothing spectacular. Maybe there's an argument that Greg overachieved in that game at least, and maybe he's a better manager. Who knows? I still don't think so, but I think it's a perfect result to point to show that Southgate cannot beat bad teams convincingly, which is something we need, because in CONCACAF, it's all bad teams. So we need to be able to beat up on them consistently. I don't know if Southgate can do that.
Yeah, I think that game, like you said, if we honestly look back and see the chance that that McKennie missed, where he could have had a better shot. Pulisic hit the post as well. So honestly, like you said, there is a sample there where every USMNT, I'm pretty sure, tuned in for that match, and that's the product that we would be dealing with possibly if he was at the helm. Maybe worse, because as you said, we have a good good pool, but not as talented as England. So he wouldn't have the talent to rely on to bail him out. So leading up to this, we have to talk as well about his biggest failures and successes, if there are any. In my opinion, there are a few of the points that I will highlight. But in your opinion, Braden, what are the biggest things that we can take as these are the de facto things that he has on his resume, whether it's good or bad?
I'll start with the positives. I think they're pretty straightforward. I mean, we've said it already in the video. He led England to two finals, back-to-back finals in the Euros. Ultimately, didn't get it done, but you can maybe say it was his fault for the choosing who took the penalties. But at the end of the day, the manager's not the one who's taking the penalties. He's not the one in goal trying to save the penalties. That's more down to the players. They drew Italy throughout regular time, extra time in the final. I think that was a very successful tournament for England, despite maybe being a bit boring to watch. But sometimes boring gets the job done, and it seemed to do that in the Euros at the very least. And despite getting, like I said, played off the pitch by Spain, that's one of the most talented or most dominant tournament performances we've seen in a long, long time from this Spain team. So I don't think there's really much of a shame in losing to them in the final, especially the fact that it was only a 1-goal game and getting all the way there despite the unconvincingness at the start of the tournament. It's impressive. And as well, getting to the semifinal of the World Cup, and even in the last one, they only made the quarterfinal, but they lost to France, outplayed France by a large margin, it has to be said. If Kane hadn't skied his penalty and sent it into orbit, maybe they would have moved on, and maybe it would have been a completely different World Cup, because we know France came also close to winning, taking Argentina to penalties in the final. You can make the argument that England could have easily been in that final if they, again, individual players, Harry Kane, if he had just scored his penalty, maybe it goes to extra time and they win. But those are the main successes. The only one that's not results based for me that's a success is his defensive record. I think his teams have been very strong defensively. He seems to get the best out of Jordan Pickford, who is a good but not world class goalkeeper, I think it's fair to say. But when he's in an England shirt, he just turns up, and I think that you can give some of the credit to Southgate for performing on a decent level with the defense that he has and the goalkeeper, which will need to happen because, like I said, our defense and goalkeeper are the weakest part of the team. Now, if you look at the failures, I think, it's all the results. It's the unconvincingness of the play. He doesn't adjust well enough or quick enough. Sometimes he brings on subs too late, doesn't start the right players, plays just overall very boring football. And the biggest failure, I think, for me, it's a bit of an underrated one just because the Nations League, no one really cares about the Nations League, but I think it's very notable that in the 2022-2023 Nations League, the most recent one, they went winless in the entire thing. 6 games, 2 against Italy, 2 against Hungary, 2 against Germany, winless. 3 draws, 3 losses, 2 losses of those to Hungary, including 4-0 at home. That's inexcusable. To a team that didn't even make it out of the group stage at the Euros, to a team that didn't even qualify for the World Cup, that's inexcusable for England, a team that's supposed to be competing for all of these trophies. It's just not good enough, and now they're going to be in a Nations League group with the likes of Finland and Greece. Like, come on, this is not the level that England's supposed to be at. That's the biggest failure in terms of a tournament for me. But then outside of that, it's just the eye test, really. I mean, you watch his teams play, you fall asleep. It's the football equivalent of watching paint dry, and we just had that with Berhalter. I don't know if I want that again with Southgate.
Yeah, I don't think that it ever dried with Berhalter. It was just always there. So that's the comparison that I'll make. But I think, again, a manager that I'm not a huge fan of. I don't think that, honestly, his biggest success perhaps was getting English fans to believe a little bit, but then that's, again, down to the squad that they have. So you can't really pinpoint that to him. Even when people say that he made good subs, kind of similar to Greg, but you're just doing the obvious. You're putting the guy that should have started in the first place. So I think the only success that I can pinpoint to was maybe he did build a culture, and that's mostly because he was involved in their youth setup before, so that probably helped him. Like we saw the Spanish manager as well. These guys that come from the ground up within the federation, they already know some of the players, they know the culture, they know what it means to be around in the building, and they are good, honestly, really good PR guys. I think that Southgate was always classy on his interviews and handled some players that were in some bad moments mentality-wise, like Maguire, really well, like Pickford, and they really seem to like him. I don't think that Greg has that ability, but then again, Greg is the lowest of the low they can go with. So now, moving on to how we would play. You said that it's kind of like watching paint dry. with the players that we have at our disposal, just on formation wise, do you think that he sets up like he did in England? Do you think that he keeps a 3-man midfield in the MMA? What do you think happens? I think the entire fan base has been crying out loud for a 4-2-3-1. Do you think that would be the case with Southgate? And do you think that he would ultimately be able to get the best out of the players he would have at his disposal?
Oh, here's another thing I'm going to give Southgate credit for. He actually adapted, which is something we've never seen Greg do. Change the formation. He sticks to his guns at all times, for better or for worse. Pretty much always for worse. But in the Euros, we saw Southgate adapt. He went to a three-back system when his 4-2-3-1 wasn't working. And speaking of the 4-2-3-1, despite the fact that it didn't seem to work in the Euros, I do think that would be the system he brings into the USMNT. It's just what he knows best. And I think especially if he has been paying attention at all to our recent performances, that's what has worked the best. When we had BJ Callahan, when we had Anthony Hudson in charge as the interims, the 4-2-3-1 is what they played, and it's what worked. I don't know how much he paid attention to that. I don't know how much Matt Crocker, his friend, who's probably the one trying to recruit him, I don't know how much he's told Southgate about these results, or even if Crocker knows what happened, because I don't know if Crocker knows much of anything about what's going on with the USMNT. Didn't even turn up to our crucial game in Copa America, but it is what it is. I think that is a system he would bring in, and it does suit our players the best. I can't tell you the personnel he'd play. He does seem to play, for the most part, the best players on paper. So I think you can anticipate if he does come in, Reina will be at the 10, Pusick will be on the left-hand side. He does try to accommodate some of the players. He played Jude Bellingham at the 10, tried to play Foden on the wing, but I mean, obviously we know it didn't end up working out for England, but he tries to accommodate his players sometimes, does play a couple players out of position, which is a little bit worrisome, but overall, there's not really anyone in our squad that I think would be playing out of position anyway in a 4-2-3-1. Maybe he switches Pusick's side, but I think he works on either one anyway. So I do think in terms of the formation, that would be good. In terms of the style of play, it would just be boredom, just football terrorism. We'd just pass it around, which is kind of what we did under Greg, but I don't know if the emphasis would necessarily be on crossing. Probably just methodically try to work the ball into the box. Don't shoot unless you get a clear-cut chance, and if there's any pressure, just pass it backwards and restart again. Ultimately leading in not a lot of goals, not a lot of fun, but who knows, maybe some good results. I just think that's the system he would bring in. Whether it would work or not, I truly don't know.
Yeah, I think he'd stick with a 4-2-3-1, and honestly, it might work for the best, really. If he was to be appointed, I don't think that this is a good appointment if it was to happen, but if it does happen, I think we will have more success than we did under Greg. I'm confident that that would happen. Like you said, now it brings to the million-dollar question. I mean, after all of this, he does tick all of the boxes. If we look at it objectively, he does. And he has a lot of experience. I just think, I will say this before I ask you, I will say that I'm against it. It's a no for me, because ultimately there are better guys out there that are available. In my opinion, Joachim Low should be the #1 priority. But do you think that ultimately it's a good or a bad appointment, Braden? Do you think it will happen? What's the likelihood, if you want to put in a 1 through 10 scale, that Matt Crocker gets one of his buddies in?
Well, like you said, it's the million-dollar question. It's the title of the video. Should the USMNT hire Gareth Southgate? I'm torn right now. I think all that matters for me really is that the USSF and Matt Crocker are actually doing their due diligence in terms of the worldwide search. It is confirmed that they are looking for a European manager with a lot of experience at the top level, which is good. It's what we've all been calling for, and if that is truly what they're looking for, as long as they explore a variety of solid options, I'm okay with Southgate being the manager. I think it is pretty likely. It's probably the most likely of any of the ones that have been linked so far, just because Crocker does have that connection with the English Federation. He has that connection with Southgate. And I mean, like you said, Southgate's out of a job. I think it just makes sense on a lot of levels for Southgate to come in to the USMNT. I think he's a good plan B or C. There's definitely managers that I would prefer to hire, but there's also managers that I would rather have Southgate than have them, if that makes sense. Like some of the MLS guys, I mean, I think they've effectively removed themselves from the race by just the criteria that USSF is looking for. But at the end of the day, my verdict would probably still be no, because I do think there are a lot of better options out there, but he does tick all the boxes. He has a lot of success, and ultimately, I don't think this would be the worst hire. Maybe in terms of our fun and watching and how good of a time we have watching the games, it probably would be one of the worst. But in terms of results, I truly think there's a lot worse that we can do. I don't think this would be as bad of a hire as some people are painting it out to be, but also not necessarily a first choice. So I'm gonna go for no for now, but it's not the end of the world if he comes in.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be an adamant no. Just again, based on the guys that are out there available. I mean, if it all comes down to an MLS guy or Southgate, I'll probably say Southgate, but I just can't see it really working. I would rather, honestly, Nancy than Southgate. I know it's crazy, but I just think that looking at Southgate's resume, what has led him to achieve what he has achieved. But hey, if he comes in, I think we would still get results regardless. I don't really care too much about how we play, to be honest. I mean, I grew up watching Italian soccer. Catenaccio for me works, and that's fine. But ultimately, it's a question for you guys that are watching. Do you think it's a good or a bad hire? And when I say good or bad hire, put it in the comments if it would be acceptable, at least. As we know, there are guys that we would rather watch take over the USMNT. But ultimately, let us know in the comments down below. Why do you think it's a good hire or not? What other guys do you see? We see some reports coming out about Pochettino. Could be the next one in line. Maybe last time around they did interviews done, apparently. I don't know how that interview went. So stay tuned, as well as we are going to be bringing videos about with more highlight on the managers that are out there and could possibly be the new USMNT coach. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.